Welcome back to the channel. I am your host, Johnny Gaz. Thank you for returning for another video. We are now moving on to our tier list 2.0. We're into week 3 of the NFL season. We have a much better look and feel for all 32 NFL teams. So let's put them on our tier list and see who stands on top of the NFL mountain. Let's go. Before we climb that mountain, make sure to like the video if you dig the vibe here at Johnny Gaz Sports. Hitting that subscription button and notify bell is the best way to make sure you don't miss any future videos. We just surpassed 2,000 subscribers thanks to you guys. I cannot say thank you enough. There's a membership option available here at Johnny Gaz Sports, and a video like this one today, the tier list NFL Mountain, will be exclusive moving forward. But we have a ton of fun-free content that we'll have all NFL season long. Again, thank you guys so much for the support. Let's dive into today's topic. So here's our tier list, version 2.0, as we head into week 3 of the NFL season. Our categories break down just like this, the top of the mountain. And of course, we have the Kansas City Chiefs, who have moved to 2-0 on a tough victory over the Cincinnati Bengals. Maybe a victory that Cincinnati aided in a little bit, but that's Kansas City's MO. They win games they aren't supposed to win. That's why they're on the top of the mountain. Our categories moving down go to contenders, those teams that are true Super Bowl contenders that could put themselves in a position to compete with the Kansas City Chiefs down the road. We then move into the in the hunt category, teams that are surely in the playoff hunt and are just kind of on that cusp of being true Super Bowl contenders. Then we move down into our not sure what you are category, those teams that are sort of waffling in between, sort of being contenders and non-contenders, pretenders, if you will. And then we have our barely hanging on category, those teams that necessarily haven't slipped into the abyss, but they're going to need some help to get back into the mix. And then, of course, we have our forget about it category, which last week we had the Carolina Panthers and the New York Giants. We have a new addition to the forget about it category today, and that is the Denver Broncos. Unfortunately, the offense through Bo Nix is not working. The experiment with him so far, it's not paying off, and they're really going to have to adjust their philosophy and how they move forward through this season. I think it's to the point where there's just not hope that this is the solution this season, and for that reason, I have them now in the forget about it category. At the very bottom of the mountain, I think we still have the Carolina Panthers. They are in a position where they've now benched Bryce Young for Andy Dalton. And, I mean, if that tells you everything you need to know, this is where they stand. And you know, maybe he does need more time, some more seasoning, but I think this halts his progression here as an NFL quarterback. And unfortunately, I just don't see good things for this organization, at least for this season. The New York Giants, unfortunately, also suffered another loss in week 2. And to me, Daniel Jones just isn't the guy. You know, I mean, in a vacuum sense, he can be okay in a single game situation, but I think unless they give him more pieces, this is a failing operation. They forced the ball to Malik Neighbors. He did show some promise. He's a great wide receiver, but we're talking about against the Washington Commanders, and they ended up losing that game, just not enough offensively. And if that's the way they're going to play, I just don't see them crawling out of the abyss here. So for right now, we have those 3 teams in our forget about it category. Let's now move our way up the NFL mountain. We'll go in alphabetical order and see where each team stands. Starting in alphabetical order, we go to the Arizona Cardinals, which I've done a lot of research here over the last week, as that is the next opponent for my team, the Detroit Lions. Arizona took a real step up in week 2 of the NFL season. They had a tough loss to Buffalo in week 1, but came out firing in week 2 against kind of a depleted LA Rams team. But not only offensively, defensively, they were able to handle this game from top to bottom. Kyler Murray was truly almost perfect in this game. He had a perfect quarterback rating. I think he had 4 touchdowns. He was good on the ground. So everything kind of worked. Their running game is really hitting their stride. James Conner behind a good offensive line. And again, their defense was very good against Matt Stafford and the LA Rams. So to me, they've taken a step up into the in the hunt category. And really, to me, that's on the basis of Kyler Murray's play. If you get the type of quarterback play he gave them in week 2, I think we'd have to reevaluate how we look at where the Arizona Cardinals could end up at the end of the season. So to me, they are in the hunt. The Atlanta Falcons, and they came off an interesting finish in Monday Night Football, getting the win over Philadelphia. You could argue that Philadelphia sort of gave them that game, but Kirk Cousins completed the final drive in a miraculous fashion, to be honest with you. They dunked down that field no problem and scored the winning touchdown. And it was impressive, but I think Kirk Cousins' performance still left some to be desired. I think he's still warming back into his true shape here for this NFL season, coming off the Achilles injury. So you still wonder if that's something that they can maintain. Again, I think Philly's kind of had this game in hand and sort of gave it away. So to me, you still have a lot of questions. I'm not 100% sure who the Atlanta Falcons are. So that's where they end up on my list this week. The Baltimore Ravens. This is a tough one because they open the season in Kansas City, lose by a toe, do some good things and bad things in that opening week. But then they have a loss now in week 2 to the Las Vegas Raiders, and they actually dropped the game after losing a double-digit lead in the fourth quarter. You know, there's so much talent on the Baltimore Ravens that you have to think it gets turned around. John Harbaugh squads do not start 0-2 often. I think 2015 is the last time that was the case. So you have to imagine there's still some fight there. They're not suffering any major injuries, so everything's still in front of them. But starting off 0-2 and certainly, going 0-3 would not be ideal. To me, the Ravens have now moved from true contenders, where they were on my last tier list, down to more of the in the hunt category. They have to prove they can climb out of this hole and do the things necessary to win football games. So right now, the Baltimore Ravens have slipped down to the in the hunt tier of this list. Now the Buffalo Bills, who moved to 2-0 after a convincing victory over the Miami Dolphins here in week 2. Although Tua Tagovailoa did go out of that game about midway through. Buffalo was in control of that game even prior to that injury. Their offensive line has been pretty good. Josh Allen has looked good, although he's been banged up. Again, to me, and I think I said this last week, they go where Josh Allen takes them. And if he can remain healthy, and this defense, who has played pretty well since about the halftime of their first week through the Miami game, if that continues, Buffalo could make moves. I mean, they were Super Bowl contenders in previous seasons. I think they had sort of fallen off going into this year because of maybe some talent deficiencies and losing from last season. But to me, them starting 2-0, they're starting to show some of the signs of a Bills team that could truly compete. To me, this Bills team is a contender. If Josh Allen stays healthy, if this offensive line continues to protect him, they could do some serious damage. So to me, the Buffalo Bills are true contenders now here going into week 3. Moving on to the Chicago Bears, I think you got to focus on Caleb Williams' performance, and he was truly beat up in that game. He was hit and pressured like crazy, so it's hard to keep up with as a rookie quarterback. He tried to make plays. It just hasn't worked out so far in these first 2 weeks. Now, they were lucky to get that win in week 1 over Tennessee and the Will Levis craziness that happened there, but they weren't as successful here in week 2. They're now 1-1. They have a lot of question marks, especially up front in their offensive line. Can they protect Caleb Williams, and does that ultimately hinder his development very early on? Again, Chicago's going to have to be patient with this. I think good things can come down the road, and they do have talent. But right now, I think you're kind of asking the question. We're not exactly sure who you are. They were very close for me to be barely hanging on, but I think, again, you got to give them time. So for right now, they're in the not sure what you are category. The Cincinnati Bengals feel like they're always in the hunt with Joe Burrow, but the problem is they're 0-2, and they've really bit themselves in the foot in these 2 weeks, and that was so true in the Bengals-Chiefs game here this past week. They had some penalties, they had an unsportsmanlike, a lot of things that cost them the game, and if one of those things goes the other way, they may not be 0-2, but they are. Joe Burrow looked good against the Chiefs, and I think it probably deserved a win. To me, they are in the hunt, but at 0-2, I don't know who they are yet. And unless they start to pile on some wins, you might not be able to say they are in the hunt. So for right now, I have the Cincinnati Bengals in the middle. And the Cleveland Browns, who went to 1-1 on an unconvincing win over the Jacksonville Jaguars, who themselves have been pretty poor. But they finally got a decent performance out of the offense and Deshaun Watson, but they struggle with penalties. They almost killed themselves towards the end of the game on big plays that got called back, and they're going to have to clean that up to have any chance to move forward or be in the hunt here. They have a better schedule coming up that might help them out, but if they don't get more consistent quarterback play and they don't clean up the penalties, they may be in a tough spot. I really don't know who the Cleveland Browns are at this point, and that is where they'll fall here in my week 3 tier list. The Dallas Cowboys, they did suffer a big loss in week 2 to the thriving New Orleans Saints, and we'll talk about them here just down the road. But Dallas, to me, has taken a step back. They had a good week 1 win in Cleveland, and they now come back home to Jerry World, and they've been very good at home the past several seasons, and they just got blown out by the New Orleans Saints, who runs an offense like the San Francisco 49ers, who also decimated the Cowboys recently. So it's hard to know what this team is, especially so on early in the season. And although I thought they could stay in the hunt as of last week, based on the performance that I saw in week 2, they've now moved into the category of not sure who or what you are. I think there's certainly talent there that can put them in the mix and they can work their way out of this. But that performance at home against New Orleans leaves up a lot of questions. And talk about questions. Let's move on to the Detroit Lions, who offensively have just been terrible through the first 2 games of the season. Now, yardage-wise in week 2, they were better, but they were 1 for 7 in the red zone and, turning the ball over. Jared Goff hasn't looked up to form. Although Aiden Hutchinson was dominant against the Buccaneers with 4.5 sacks, and the defense actually played pretty well in these 2 weeks, their offense, who was top 3 the last several seasons, has been nothing but here through 2 weeks. So the Lions have a lot of questions to answer as they go to Arizona against the hot Cardinals team here in week 3. To me, they are still contenders on this list because they had a very similar loss last year in week 2 to Seattle, coming off a big victory in Arrowhead against the Chiefs. So I'm going to give the Lions one more week before we start to adjust them one way or another. I'm hoping for the positive, of course, but they're going to have to answer their questions offensively. Jared Goff's going to have to get back to form, and we'll see what they have in store for week 3. The Green Bay Packers, who with Malik Willis were able to get a win in week 2 over the Indianapolis Colts. And you got to credit the coaching staff for, coming in with the right game plan there to help protect Malik Willis. And he actually looked okay in that win. What's funny is they're going to Tennessee next week, where he was traded this preseason. So it'll be interesting to see if Tennessee has any inside information or vice versa. And can the Packers get another win without Jordan Love? And to me, that was the biggest question. How can they maintain this in his absence? And so far in 1 week, they've gotten a victory. Now, I don't think that necessarily moves them into Super Bowl contender category where they may have been to start the season. I think they stay right in the hunt. We'll see what the next several weeks have in store with Malik Willis still at the helm. And if they can maintain this, then maybe they move themselves back in there. For now, I have them in the hunt. Next up is the Houston Texans, and for me, it was really in between 2 categories. They're at 2-0. I think they've, C.J. Stroud, Nico Collins, they've proven themselves on the offensive side, but they were really not there here in their week 2 win over the Bears. And we talked about the Caleb Williams effect in that game. Really, the Bears had no business being in that game, and because of Houston's offense, they were able to stay in it. The defense really carried the day for them there, and that's really good to see. But if they're ultimately going to become true contenders, they're going to have to combine those 2 and mix offensive, defensive success. And I don't think we've seen that yet so far. So for me, the Houston Texans are still in the hunt. The Indianapolis Colts, who lost to the Jordan Loveless Green Bay Packers here in week 2. Anthony Richardson, although he has a lot of dynamic play in him, we just haven't seen enough of it so far this season. Hasn't had many completions, has run the ball maybe a little bit more than they'd like. Ultimately, they've been dominated up front in their 2 matchups here, and that's what I think is the most concerning thing. There's just not enough meat on the bones here for Indianapolis to think that they're going to put themselves in playoff contention. And unless they start to get more production up front, I think they're going to struggle. So for me at this point, Indianapolis is my first team that's barely hanging on in our tier list 2.0. The Jacksonville Jaguars, who also are at 0-2, and they've had 2 tough losses. They've just been so up and down. Trevor Lawrence just hasn't been consistent, I think, since his early days in the NFL. I think he came in with a lot of hype and actually looked very, very good early on in his career. But I think other factors surrounding that organization has sort of hurt this thing in general. I believe the stat I saw is the Jaguars have lost 7 of 8 or 8 of their last 9 games. Going back to last year, that is not a good trend. And they've gotten themselves into big deficits here in week 1 and week 2 that they've been unable to dig out of. And that's worrisome for me. To me, I think they're barely hanging on. This is a team that has to be feeling some pressure. The quarterback, the head coach, things just are turning in the wrong direction, and they got to figure that out quickly. The Las Vegas Raiders, who I could have made an argument were barely hanging on last week, pull out a miraculous victory over the Baltimore Ravens in week 2. Gardner Minshew goes from zero to hero. Their playmakers start to make plays and things start to turn around. But there's so much up and down there. What is the true potential with the Raiders? And I have no idea. So to me, they're in the not sure what you are category. Very clear. And the LA Chargers, who led by Jim Harbaugh, have taken on kind of a new identity. Heavy run now, supporting Herbert and his efforts, and I think it's paying off. I think the one thing you got to look at, though, is they've beaten the Raiders in week 1 and then the Panthers in week 2. So how much do you really take out of that? But they are 2-0, and they've looked really, really good. Their defense has dominated first 2 weeks. So there's a lot there. Is this sustainable? We'll have to see. They have some better matchups coming up. I think one with the Chiefs here in a couple weeks. So we'll really see what the Chargers are. I think at this point, based on their performance, they're in the hunt. And of course, the other team in LA, the Rams, who were very gutsy in their week 1 loss to the Lions. They just didn't have it. Didn't have enough, let's say, in their week 2 loss to the Arizona Cardinals, who really decimated them. But at the same time, the Rams are really hurting injury-wise. They've now lost Cooper Kupp as well. They are without Puka Nacua. Both offensively and defensively, they've had to do a lot to kind of makeshift these first 2 weeks. And unfortunately, they haven't been able to pull one out. And things seem to be getting a little worse. Now, I think any team with Matt Stafford as the quarterback, Sean McVay as the coach, will do what's necessary to make the team competitive. And as they start to get guys back, things may shift. They have an early bye week. That will help. So I don't want to say they're certainly out of it, but if they lose more games here up front, things are going to start to get tough early. I got to put them in the barely hanging on category. And the reason why is, we know who they are. Matt Stafford, again, I won't say it again, but at the helm, we know what this team is. They just need to get these guys back. So can they hang in there long enough to be able to compete down the road and be in the hunt for the playoffs? We'll have to see. And the Miami Dolphins, who we know last week lost quarterback Tua Tagovailoa to another concussion. So there's a lot of questions in Miami land and how they will make up for loss of the quarterback. I believe Skylar Thompson will step into that role. And can he do enough with the weapons that they have to maintain some sort of offense? Do they go back to the run game and A-chain and just rely on him? And can that be enough, again, to make moves here in the AFC now without Tua? And I don't know that they can. And to me, I won't put them in the forget about it category. It's certainly way too early for that, and we'll have to see what happens. But for right now, they're barely hanging on. We'll have to monitor them week to week and see what Miami does. And the Minnesota Vikings, who surprisingly moved to 2-0. Now, they did defeat the lowly Giants in week 1, but came through with a surprising victory at home against the San Francisco 49ers. Defense played awesome in that game, sacking Brock Purdy 6 times. So the Brian Flores defense just doing work there. And the real question is, can Sam Darnold maintain his play? And he's played confident. He's looked like a decent quarterback here through 2 weeks. Certainly not the guy he was several seasons ago. And that I'm sure has a lot to do with coaching and the scheme there. So we'll see if they can maintain that. I think at this point we're kind of finding out who they are. And unless Sam Darnold falls off, we'll have to, again, we'll monitor it and we'll change it as is. But for right now at 2-0 and the way they look, especially with that defense holding down San Francisco at the time, I think Minnesota's in the hunt. Next up, the New England Patriots, who went to 1-1 on a loss to the Seattle Seahawks. And they just didn't look good offensively in the second half. They really haven't been able to throw the ball very well this season with Jacoby Brissett at the helm. And more than anything, their pass defense has been really bad. And that's partly the reason why they lost to Seattle in week 2. But they could have as easily been 2-0 at this point as well because of some of those costly mistakes and some of these things we've talked about. So it's hard to get a read on what New England is. I think they're limited at quarterback, and that will ultimately be their downfall. But I think through 2 weeks at 1-1, I still have to say we're not sure exactly who they are. So they'll fall right in the middle here on this week's tier list. And maybe the surprise of the NFL so far, the New Orleans Saints, who offensively has dominated their first 2 weeks. Derek Carr looks like a whole new guy. Let me read you these stats. 30 for 39 passing so far in the season for 443 yards, 11.4 yards per attempt, 5 TDs and 1 pick. I don't think anybody would have expected that. The new offensive coordinator, Clint Kubiak, has changed the way that they're handling business there in New Orleans, and it's clearly working. Now, it is only 2 weeks. We'll have to see if this is something they can sustain. Do defenses catch up to this? Will things shift? Yes, of course, a little bit. But over the NFL's first 2 weeks this year, passing efficiency has been down. but not for the New Orleans Saints. They're breaking that curve. So to me, at this point, they have clearly put themselves in the hunt. The Aaron Rodgers-led New York Jets. Hard to get a read on them. I think the defense still leaves a lot to be desired after that Week 1 loss that they had, but they look better in Week 2. They have an emerging running game. Aaron Rodgers looks a little bit more comfortable, but really only in spurts. So it's hard to tell. I mean, this one I waffled between still not being sure who they are and in the hunt. And it could vary week to week. One we're going to have to monitor. And, of course, Aaron Rodgers has been healthy now through 2 weeks, so that scare is kind of out the window. To me, I think if everything holds true, I think the defense continues to turn around. I think this team is in the hunt. The Philadelphia Eagles, who after Week 1 may have been the class of the NFL, I think took a little step back in Week 2. Now, they had a lot of good in that Monday night performance against the Atlanta Falcons. I thought Jalen Hurts was excellent in that game. There were a lot of good things that he did there. The Philadelphia weapons were still there and ready to go. And really, in the end of things, they probably should have won that game. It was a tough decision to throw the ball at the end. And then, of course, you had the drop by Saquon Barkley. If any one of those things go another way, the Philadelphia Eagles are 2-0 and maybe a whole different story. But the way that thing ended was tough. And for Atlanta to just drive right down the field, 70 yards, bing, bang, boom, game over, that was hard to see. In Philadelphia at home, that crowd was out of it. That was a tough loss. So I had them as Super Bowl contenders in Week 1. I think this loss proves that that's not where they're at yet. Maybe I was premature with that. So I'm going to move them back to in the hunt here heading into Week 3. And the only team in the NFL to be 2-0 and have both those victories be on the road, the Pittsburgh Steelers. And I cannot get a read on this team. Will Justin Fields be the quarterback? Will Russell Wilson be the quarterback? I mean, right now, Justin Fields has done enough to get them there, but offensively, they have really not done much. It's been the defense that has carried the day for the Steelers, and they just don't know. So to me, the Steelers, even though they are 2-0, I have no idea who they are. The San Francisco 49ers, who suffered that loss on the road at Minnesota. Again, they're without CMC, but we know the capabilities that team has, the power they have behind their offense, and of course the defense. But I think the issue last week was, defensively. They gave up a lot of key third downs, were not able to get off the field, which is uncharacteristic of the 49ers defense. And so we'll have to see where that goes from here. The other thing is, can they always rely on Brock Purdy? I don't know. I mean, some people think Brock Purdy has proven himself. Others think he's a victim of the system, and I think you get a little bit of both here so far in the opening games here of 2024. I don't think this knocks San Francisco off the peg of the NFC's best team. So to me, they're still true Super Bowl contenders, but we'll monitor this like with the Lions over the next several weeks. And now the 2-0 Seattle Seahawks, who have beaten Denver and New England in the first 2 weeks, but Geno Smith has looked steady. They're adjusting to a new offense. So there's a lot of changes here in Seattle early on this season, but they've held true through the first 2 weeks, and they're at 2-0. It's hard to sit here and say that they're any sort of contender. I think there's a lot there. There's a lot of talent deficiency compared to some of the other teams, I think, in the NFC. But if this continues in the progression that we're seeing through the first couple of weeks, and they have a very winnable game in Week 3 against the Miami Dolphins, they're going to set themselves up for success here on the NFC side of this playoff race. So to me, they are clearly in the hunt. And those pesky Tampa Bay Buccaneers, led by Baker Mayfield, they have really looked good in the first 2 weeks of the season. Now, they did play Washington in the first week, but offensively looked fantastic. I truly expected the Lions to win last week at home against a depleted secondary of the Bucs, and they really handled the Lions. They gave up a ton of yards offensively to the Lions, but locked them up in the red zone. The Lions were 1 for 7. Baker Mayfield made plays. He scored a touchdown on a quarterback draw. He was just gutsy, and he has been for 2 weeks. His numbers speak for themselves. He's been really good. And Todd Bowles and his defense has been able to piece things together enough to hold themselves in there, and I think the job they did against the Lions was masterful. The secondary, who was depleted, has lost Antoine Winfield for several weeks, actually looked very good against a talented Lions wide receiver, tight end room, and running backs, and really held them down. So the Bucs at 2-0 really have a leg up in the NFC. To me, they are very clearly in the hunt. Second to last, the Tennessee Titans, and I was so close to putting them on the forget about it list. I just think the gaffes that have been made specifically by Will Levis the last several weeks, and This last week looked very similar to how they lost in Chicago. It wasn't as bad, but just too many mistakes there. The only thing that keeps them barely hanging on, in my opinion, is the fact that their defense has looked good in stretches and has been able to keep them in games. And if Will Levis is able to clean up some of these mistakes, things could turn around. So I don't want to write them off just yet. To me, the Tennessee Titans are barely hanging on. And last but not least is the Washington Commanders, who did get their first victory of the season and was Dan Quinn's first victory as their defensive coordinator. But it came against the New York Giants. And I think there was some things there that you can get excited about. Their run game looked pretty good. It helps Jaden Daniels as he develops as a quarterback. And that's really the biggest thing. Can he develop into more of a passer? Can Washington's defense sort of step up and help win games when necessary? I think they have a long road ahead of them. I think Jaden Daniels is a true project. But to me, I certainly think there is some upside there. So I'm going to put them in the not sure what you are category as we kind of see how they develop over the next several weeks. So that'll do it, guys, for our tier list 2.0 as we head into week 3 of the NFL regular season. We'll follow it up next week and continue down the road through this NFL season and see who climbs up that NFL mountain. If you dig the vibe here at Johnny Guest Sports, make sure to hit that like button. It's the best free way to help out the channel. The subscription button and notify bell is the best way to make sure you don't miss any future videos. There is a membership option available, and a video like this, the tier list, our live play-by-play of games, all available to members here at Johnny Guest Sports. But of course, I'll have all the fun, free content you've come to love, and I will continue to do that for you guys here. Comment down below, what did you think of our NFL Mountain this week? Did I miss anything? Would you move anybody around? I love hearing from you guys, so let me know where you have your team on the NFL Mountain. Thank you guys so much for your time. Have a great rest of your week, and go Lions.